educate your clients. So providing webinars to help them answer some of the questions, be sure to survey them to know what questions they have, and then potentially do a webinar. And for really, when you connect with a prospect, you may need to go old school. You may have to, I don't have my here in front of me, you may need to write a handwritten thank you note. What are those things you can do to separate yourself from other people to show that both you're authentic and you really care, you have empathy for their situation. So always be aware of that. But ultimately, education to me, is probably the greatest tool you could give someone, so that one, whether it be they already have your product, you're continuing to help them use your product or service better, or they're looking at, they have a problem, educating them how to get out of it. And hopefully you're the way they get out of it. But again, may go old school, handwritten thank you notes, to me, is still a go-to.
Yeah, and Mitch, just to hitchhike onto that, if someone is really helping you meet a need that you have, it doesn't matter. I don't mind if it's virtually. It doesn't have to be. That is not the variable. The real variable is my need being met as a customer? Is it really being met? And I think that's what we should be focusing on. The fact that we can't see them necessarily face to face. If we are actually really tuned into what their issues are and really trying to solve them, then I think, yeah, that being virtual is irrelevant. And I think that, that's the kind of thing we as a team debate a lot. What is it that is really the need that we really need to be addressing and helping people with?
Yeah. One thing I think was very unique is I happen to have gotten to know the gentleman that runs all the Rick Hendrick dealerships here in Charleston. And he was telling me that they've hired extra people on their staff, that if a person has a desire, and I'll just use Lexus because that's one of their brands, if they actually are interested in a Lexus, they get as much information about the Lexus they're most interested in, and one of their people will actually drive it to that person's house to let them see it and even test drive it. So that's going above and beyond, and I think that's a perfect example of going extra mile to show that you really do care and you understand their situation. You don't want to put them in a predicament. I think that's a beautiful way to do it. So there's one example.
Yeah, very good.
Great responses. I've had experience with that myself. I feel like we have utilized our putting things in the mail to people and physically connecting with people that way more now than ever, as well as going over and above and actually redirecting funds also towards efforts that will enable us to go over and above to connect with people in an authentic way. Great question. We also had a question that says, how do we maintain alignment at all levels of the organization with a strategy that is flexible? So this is really connecting the idea of a flexible strategy with maintaining alignment.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Let me take a stab at that, Mitch. The first thing I would say is you have got to be really clear on the purpose. If you really are clear on the purpose, that's what's going to create the alignment all the way through the organization and across the whole organization. And if that isn't clear, then it really does make it a lot harder. So that'd be the first thing. The second thing is, I think you've got to really work at involving people. People own what they create. And if they feel they've been part of the process, even at levels that normally don't necessarily participate in, if they feel that they've had input and a contribution, they're much more likely to own it. So I would say if you can be really clear, and I don't know the context, what the context is behind the question, but if you can be really clear on the purpose and then really identify how do you get people engaged in it, then I think you've got really the makings of a very flexible strategy that has very wide buy-in.
Awesome. We got a question in the chat that says the pandemic can push you to adjust your strategy, but any change means additional cost associated with that transition. Therefore, the question is, when do you start to switch? I believe that's the question. Indeed, if the pandemic is there still for a while, starting too early could be another source of embarrassment, or maybe feeling like you didn't do the right thing is what I'm interpreting here. So the question is, when do you start to switch, knowing that making this transition is going to mean additional cost?
Yeah, Mitch, do you want to take a stab?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, ultimately it is somewhat of a guessing game, but what you want to make sure you are, it's better to err on one side than the other. So make sure you really evaluate which side, that if you had to err on, which one has the least amount of risk, the least amount of problems long-term. Because yeah, we have seen some people adjust, but ultimately, hopefully this thing will get somewhat back to normal. I'm not thinking it's ever going to go back to the old normal, but being sure that you're putting the right people, the right resources in place for transition, because inevitably, things will change one way or the other in probably the next year, 6 months, who knows? So you've got to make sure that if I do make a mistake, which one has the least amount of impact on my organization?
Mm-hmm. And you made the point early on, Mitch, that we need to be thinking about this not just from our own point of view, but from our customers' point of view. And so if we understand the customers, what kind of decisions they're making, and then that could make it easier to make a better decision ourselves. And that would be true internally as well. Whether we are servicing people internally to really know what it is that how they're interpreting it and how they're planning and preparing, that could really help us in terms of deciding when to make that transition.
Great. Well, I believe we could take time for one more question. We have one here that came in that says, with change saturation at an all-time high, how do we press forward with change while keeping our employees engaged?
That's a great question. I think my starting point would be to try to identify where is the resistance to change. Is it a lack of understanding, or it could be that there's pretty clear understanding, but they just don't buy into it, or they may buy into the direction you're going in, but not the way you're pursuing it. And so I think if we can really listen to them and address those, then I think that can really go a long way to help. Now, at some point, you just got to make the decision. And, it's one of the unpleasant realities in the workplace is that sometimes you have to make a decision that people aren't going to like. And especially if there's a time limit, if there's a time crunch on it, and sometimes you just got to force a change. But I think before you do that, it's easy to make that decision prematurely. I think we've got to do everything we can to create the buy-in before we have to do that.
It really does go back to everything you said, Tony, about purpose.
Right.
I'm sure that the person that submitted that question prior to the event may have even had a little bit of resolve during the event today, listening to what you had to share about setting those power goals that are purpose-driven, as well as really establishing your purpose in the process. I do believe that folks will engage at a much higher level whenever it is a purpose-driven goal, even if it is in the midst of a lot of change saturation, which can be a little taxing on your employees.
And I would add one other thing too, and I think that if we really have as leaders a developmental mindset, that we really want to develop and help with the people that we're leading grow, then they'll accept all kinds of change, because they'll know that in this change, there's an opportunity for me to grow. And my boss is going to help make sure that I get the growth that I need. And it's not just to fulfill an organizational need, that there really is personal benefit to me. I'm going to get something out of this. I'm going to grow. If we have that developmental mindset, that goes a long way. It's actually huge in helping create buy-in for change.
And one thing I'll add is that in a time like this, you cannot over communicate. I don't think you'll ever hear an employee say you gave me too much information. Because if the communication constantly stays focused back on the why, the purpose, then they'll effectively know, hey, I'm doing this for time to help us achieve our why, knowing it may just be a short-term, adjustment, i.e. working from home 12 hours versus working at an office for 8 hours. Those type things, I think. But again, communicate.
Such a good point. Well, guys, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge. We really put you to the test with the rapid fire questions that you hadn't even really prepared to answer. So for those of you who are still with us right now, you can tell that we really are here to help you solve problems. So if you have anything else that you'd like to reach out to LDI about, we would be happy to help you. We'd be happy to help coach, guide, instruct, or provide material for you in the midst of all of these changes. And it's just a difficult time to know how to navigate. So we'd love to come alongside of you as a partner if you're needing additional assistance in this process. So thank you so much for being with us today and for staying for our Q&A after the webinar. And we look forward to hearing from you, and we wish you really, really well in all of your endeavors. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you all.